I would like to open up December's meeting of the Conservation Commission. The next meeting date, any continued hearings, will go to a January 15th, 2019 date. The minutes of November 20th, did the members get a chance to read them?
Yes.
Did they note any errors or omissions? No. Then I will entertain a motion to accept them and place them on file.
Seconded. Oh. Motion to accept. Seconded.
All those in favor? Aye. We have a continued notice of intent to raise an existing home and construct a new single-family dwelling from Brian and Kelly Kelly. Just for the board's information, they went before selectmen for a method to enter the property and construct. The Board of Selectmen sent them back some conditions that are somewhat burdensome. So they came back in, I had a meeting with them, and then I met with town council. They're gonna come forward with a method of entry that is acceptable to the commission and will be run by the Board of Selectmen. I think that the Board of Selectmen will take any recommendation that the board makes to them. So that's where they are. I expect to see them shortly. I told them that they would need to re-advertise, legally re-advertise before they got back on the agenda. It would be my recommendation that we grant the Kellys a continuance to the January 15th date.
Moved. Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have a continued notice of intent to build a single-family home from Plum Island Blue LLC at 17C Fordham Way. I called Patrick Seacamp, or Michael Seacamp, I think it was. They're both in the business. And had and left a message with him that if we did not hear from them, that they had a burden to move forward, and if they did not move forward, we would drop them without prejudice from the agenda. I have not heard back from them. I only called him yesterday, so it would be my recommendation to the board that we continue him one more month and then drop him if we don't hear from him.
Motion to continue. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have a continued notice of intent to improve the right-of-way and construct an emergency access driveway from the town of Newbury on 14th Street.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Matt Tessier. I'm here with Tom Hughes. We're here representing the town for this emergency access way project. I'm going to go through kind of the roadway design, the engineering of it, and then Tom's going to step in and describe the environmental impacts and the mitigation effort that we are putting forward in this project. So there's been actually let me turn these in first. This is the green card minutes. There's been an effort for quite a few years now to evaluate getting a second means of access between Northern Boulevard and Old Point Road in case of an emergency and something around the center having an issue with a large storm, maybe some major erosion event, causing access issues, to create kind of a second means, safe means of access into the area. We looked at a whole bunch of different potential areas. We looked at 16th to Hutchins Street. We looked at 12th to Old Point Drive. We looked at coming off 10th Street. We looked at potential, developing the paper street off of 8th and even 6th around through 2nd Street. Many of those alternatives had either much larger impacts associated with them, more impacts to properties that had some development, or even in some cases they had major impacts to even the accessibility that emergency vehicles would have, just because some of those streets have very sharp 90-degree turns with residential development right up to really to the edge of these sharp right-of-way corners. So we ended up developing a couple of alternatives even on this site and settled with the proposal you have in front of you tonight, where we've been able to bring the impacts down to under 5,000 square feet to the coastal dune resource. What we've done is we've come off the western side, the western end of 14th Street, and we connect onto an existing gravel driveway that runs down to Old Point Road. We're using 40-foot turning radiuses on the roads, so in a certainly vehicle just trying to access and get people out, any kind of emergency vehicle trying to do that, or in a really slow speed and a good driver, you could even get the smaller fire trucks through an area like this. And 14th has a pretty straight shot out, so there's the ability to get in and out of there with those vehicles. The roadway that we're proposing to put in is obviously extremely low-speed roadway. It's gated at both ends, so it can only be used for emergency access. There is no intent for any kind of permanent public access way or even a pedestrian walkway. We've developed a roadway vertical alignment that just keeps the existing grades as close as possible to the existing dune grades that are out there, and keeping in mind that we're trying to pull a large emergency vehicle through there, so keeping the vertical curves and proposed slopes as flat as possible. Keeping the grading on the side slopes very minor. All the drainage out here now goes just to adjacent kind of small depressions. The intent is to keep all of that exactly the way it is. The road is going to be just a gravel road covered with a couple of inches of stone, rounded stone. Sand will migrate in and out of it. We don't anticipate any additional stormwater runoff or anything from this proposal. It'll infiltrate just the way it does the adjacent areas now. So with that, if there's any questions on the engineering of the road, I'd be more than happy to answer them, or I'll pass it over to Tom to talk about the...
Does the board have any questions for Matt relative to design and engineering? Well, we looked at a longer route over there, and the thing goes too, this is 4,800 square feet of impact, so it is permittable at the local level. Once you get over 5,000 square feet, it is not, we have to refuse, DEP refuses, and then it goes on to the commission and MEPA review. So that was one of the reasons to redesign this. These are undeveloped anyway. At one point, we did try and stay on those right-of-ways, but again, it made too big a project with too much impact.
Is there any upgrading of the current gravel road there?
There's no proposal to do that, no. Not with this.
Yeah.
So, for the record, Tom Hughes with Hughes Environmental. I worked with ARC Surveying and Engineering to update the plans after filing to better define vegetative impacts and better show those impacts on the plan and come up with a mitigation plan that's consistent with some of the best ones that have been approved on the island. So what I'd like to point out, so on the main plan, you can see a very detailed loss, area by area with a color coding that breaks things down into individual areas and how much impact there is. And essentially that impact comes as you leave. If you're coming down this drive, you kind of leave the drive right in this area, and then you wrap around up to 14th. As you leave the drive, you go through an area of some sand, then you hit some shrubs and small trees, and then you go through areas of mixed dune grass, beech heather, and there's also reindeer moss in there. Now, reindeer moss is not technically a vegetation, it's a lichen, but we just lumped that in with our herbaceous vegetation numbers. And then what we did is we came up with a planting scheme that basically takes those impact areas, breaks down areas of sand that we identified on site. I met the survey guys out on site, and both with my GPS and with their field equipment, we identified those sand areas in detail. And what we came up with, first of all, the impacts I combined into sort of woody vegetation impacts and herbaceous vegetation impacts. And then, based on that breakdown of how we impact it, we impact 855 square feet of woody vegetation, and that is generally in this shrubby area as you kind of leave the drive right here. And then we get into a bunch of herbaceous as we go around the corner here. So we broke that out, we impact 855 square feet of woody and 1,725 square feet of herbaceous. And so I took the two closest sand areas to the woody vegetation impacts, and I used them. Their areas A and E, which are shown on the plan. So replication area A and replication area E. Here's that shrub area. We're kind of cutting through the shrub area. So what we will do is we will be planting these with mostly woody vegetation. However, what I did call for on area A is the part that's going to be closest to the right-of-way once built. 200 square feet of that will actually be herbaceous, because I don't want to have woody vegetation right up against the right-of-way, so that you get branches and stuff that continually have to be trimmed and pruned and maintained. It just doesn't make sense. You know, snow plows impacting and all that. So what that gives us is, and then the rest of these planting areas that are shown are planted with herbaceous. And so on the woody vegetation, the primary species that I expect to be planted there would be bayberry. I expect Virginia rose to be used in areas where it makes sense to kind of transition from the herbaceous into the woody, and also maybe to restrict some foot traffic from kind of getting into the vegetation and having impacts. And then some other plants here that can be planted kind of as ancillary within that, some cherries, some beach plum, things like that. But the primary impact is to bayberry, so I wanted the primary restoration to be bayberry. We also have pitch pine. What I've done is given densities, and ultimately what will happen is when the project is done, we'll have to look at what plant availability is and come up with the actual menu of final plants, you know, how many of each. But basically this gives us adequate coverage in those areas for planting. In the herbaceous area, we basically primarily impact beech heather and beach grass, but there are some minor components of blue stem, beech pea, goldenrod, and indigo that are in there too. So I've got some of those things listed that can be kind of minor, or maybe we can get a seed mix to throw down in amongst. But the primary means of mitigation will be transplanting beech heather from the impact area and planting American dewgrass, American beachgrass. So we end up going from 855 square feet of impact of woody vegetation to 1,150. And we go from 1,725 square feet of impact of herbaceous to 2,420. So in both cases, we're making an increase in the coverage. So we're actually improving environmental conditions with that. With regard to other impacts from the roadway, there is some minor grading. There is a little bit of fill and just a touch of cut as you come around to 14th, because you're essentially going up a hill and the hill is not even, so there's got to be a little bit of grading. A lot of that is above the flood elevation, and I would put to you that, you know, and some of it is actually there because snow plows have pushed snow from the end of 14th up against the end. I would put to you that it's such a minimal amount of grading that, and I've put this in my regulatory analysis addendum that we've submitted, that I don't think that there's enough movement of sand. We're not changing dune form in any way that would affect flooding, and that's what the performance standard is whether or not it affects flooding. You know, we're in a back dune area, we're in an AE against an X. I think it's safe to say that the minor amount of sand movement, given the public nature of the project, is minimal. So I've given you a regulatory analysis addendum. The original NOI actually had a pretty good analysis of everything, but didn't really address the vegetation issues and hadn't really addressed the fact that some sand is moving, so I put that in there. These have also been sent off to DEP, and plans are handed over to them today.
Good job, Tom. It's a nice plan.
Thank you. The other thing, if of interest, I do have this is a closer view of the impact area, which is basically right here.
And that's a little bit of what I've tried to pass out to the board. The pictures that you're looking at give you just a little better picture of this infrastructure. This little knoll that we're talking about here, that's where your, what is it, 300 or 500 square feet is, 520 square feet on that knoll right there. So that kind of lines things up for you and shows you what this looks like. It's a little easier to picture than here. This is kind of busy.
Right. This is also pretty helpful because you can see, you basically have the roadway's going to come through here. You can see the very end of the paved 14, and then this is kind of a lopsided topography through here. So that's where some of the grading has to happen.
Any questions for Tom relative to the planting plans and the mitigation? Are there any abutters here? Would you like to speak?
Yes, at some point. I'm interested to see what other people have to say.
I don't know that anybody else raised their hand, so
Well-
I think you're up if you want to speak.
Sure. Well, you asked for abutters. I thought there might have been other members of the community who wanted to speak.
Do you want your letter that you submitted to the commission,
It
Steve?
wouldn't hurt in case I want to amplify. I'm Steve Mangian. I live in Newbury. And I am an abutter. Let me start with, I haven't heard a demonstrated need for the project. I've heard that the town might like to do it, but I haven't heard a demonstrated need. And that's, I don't know whether I'm ask that question or the town's rep, or whatever, but
Well,
in that sense, if there's no need, why do it?
I think you were around and aware when we almost lost Plum Island Sun.
Probably,
So
but
that's when this project was born, and it's been quite a few years. We started out with Vine Associates, and we looked at two ways, one on and one off. We were gonna come down Hutchins to 16th T, and go out that way, actually come in that way, depending on whether we were moving cars or trucks. Then this road over here was also gonna be developed for the larger vehicles. It was a pretty aggressive project to start with. You heard about the alternatives analysis that Matt gave. And when we lost Plum Island Center, it became apparent that the dog leg at 6th Street and 8th Street just don't make it. And we can't move vehicles down there in a reasonable manner. And if you lost that front primary dune, you're gonna be driving in the water. So that was our demonstrated need, Steve.
right, well, again, I'm
And
just not convinced that after, we say, 100 years, that suddenly we
Oh,
have a
that's okay,
demonstrated
I
need.
don't, yeah, my job's not to convince you, but
Right.
just tell you that was the
Right.
demonstrated
Well,
need.
but that's my comment, I don't think there's been a demonstrated need in the last 100 years. But that's sort of coming out of what I heard here. I think I also heard there was some concern about foot traffic, and I don't understand what the concern is about foot traffic on this construction, since the only traffic would be, you know, the vehicles when it's used as an emergency evac route, which is one way out.
So you don't think someone would maybe walk down that gravel road?
Well, that sort of gets me to, how are we going to enforce this to ensure that it is an emergency evacuation route?
If you look on the plans, it's gated. If you look on the plans, it's gated.
Okay, okay, here's the gate. Here's what I do.
Okay, I understand.
And that's-
You're
that's part-
demonstrating that you can walk around the gate.
Right.
I got that.
Or a bicycle around the gate, or whatever, you know, scooter around the gate, or whatever around the gate.
Okay.
So there would be an impact in the area that you really can't close it off for access. And that access does concern me, since you might be generating a lot of traffic on the dune
I think the
area.
gate was to demonstrate that it'll be closed off, whether it become a gate or a bollard or something, I think that the town could control that, but that's,
Right,
I
I mean, who
hear
do you call? I mean, can we write that into the order of conditions to make sure it's going to be one-way emergency access and not for, you know,
I hear your
daily?
comment.
That's one. I heard some reference also being made to snow plowing. Are we saying we're gonna be routinely snow plowing this emergency evac
No, I think
route?
what you heard is that pile of dirt that's there, that's vegetated right at the end of this blue line right here, is plowings from, so we come down, we plow down here, we pick up material and we've left it here, so there's a slight mound here. So that's what they're talking about with the plowing of material.
Okay. And my understanding of looking at Romano lot, and, you know, where we've always eyeballed the dune that comes down from the top of this dune down to 14th Street, is that there would be a need to do a cut through the dune, which I would have some problems with, back dune or not.
Okay.
And I don't think that's a good idea, and again, we're sort of, this gets back to, you know, what are we doing, what are the impacts? And I know that Al has verbally expressed, though he's not here unfortunately to say it for himself, that there's concern about what's gonna happen to the structure of the dune, which kind of wall might you need to build. We know there were concerns about how you build any kind of retaining structure on Plum Island, and I don't think that's been addressed adequately, at least I didn't hear it being addressed. And in previous plans that I did review, this may be a newer one than the ones I have reviewed, there was no discussion of that. And I think that needs to be done.
Steve?
Yes.
To that point, if you want, we can go
Yeah.
back and forth, and you can give all your comments, I don't care how you do it. But if you look at this, there's no wall proposed there. Elevation 16 comes down like this, elevation 16 comes down like this, and there's a slight cut there to connect those topo lines.
And these are all, you know, 1-on-2, 1-on-3 slopes, keep it nice and tight, and it's kind of the natural angle that sand will fail at, so this would be a stable slope over time.
And if it's not? I mean, the expectation that both Al and I had from eyeballing it, my eyeballing and walking it as well, was that dune is going to be subject to movement. It's coming down, and will be. And then you're into, how do you stop it from moving? Certainly Al is concerned about the traffic affecting his property, because he does own part of that dune coming down, but again, reconstructing as best I can, but I suppose I can make the comment even though I don't own that piece of property. Ultimately, a lot of this comes down to one way, so this means, if I understand the proposal that the town is making, it's an evacuation route, so you leave and you can't come back that way. Right?
Well, if we're
Well,
Maybe the first responders can.
We did not propose one way, so this is if somebody decides to stay after being asked to leave and then calls the fire department and says, you know, help me, they can access the area potentially and then leave with that individual.
Whether it's one way or two ways.
Excuse me, I didn't get a chance to finish my statement before I was interrupted. I can appreciate the first responders and light need to come back the evacuation route, and I'm not contesting that. I'm talking about the regular traffic of the citizenry coming back the evacuation route, and that's a concern.
Well, if they have to use the road, Steve, they're gonna be leaving. If there's an issue where they need to use that route to even access their homes for a while, if we lose the center, then it certainly would not be a one-way, and people would use it for the time needed.
Right, but then my point then is that it's not an evacuation route, it's a
Okay, but
coming and going
how
route.
does that fit into the this?
Well, but again, this is what's being proposed to the conservation.
I understand that,
Evacuation.
but
Emergency access.
yeah, it's emergency access, but let's kind of keep the comments to 310 CMR.
I'm trying.
All right.
But again, it's going by what I have read previously and how the project was described. And more traffic going either way means more risk to the area of critical environmental concern, the barrier island.
Not an ACEC.
It's not?
No, it's not.
I thought the whole island was.
No, it's not.
Well, yeah. Trying to keep it at 310 CMR or whatever. And I come back to say, how are we going to enforce it? And how is it going to be maintained? Who do we call? I think there needs to be something in the order of conditions that makes it clear what's to be done. Because otherwise I could see, you know, calling the police all the time to say, hey, we've got traffic, whether it's not car traffic necessarily, but traffic, whether, you know, coming on through, whether it be bicycles, pedestrians, scooters, whatever. And my understanding was that the DEP, when they did voice an interest, maybe when they thought it was going to be more than a 5,000 square foot project, whatever, was concerned that this was for emergency conditions and not for everyday traffic, and certainly not for development. And that gets me to a final, maybe not a final concern, but another concern I have is that my experience is that you can go to the zoning board of appeals and overturn anything by asking the ZBA to make a determination, yeah, we're gonna let you do it, so you could end up seeing more development along this road.
No, won't happen. It won't happen. The administrative consent order won't let it because there's no flow to these lots, period. And if there's no flow to the lots, you're not gonna get a building permit from Newburyport, they won't sign off on it. So there
That's
could be no additional flows, you know, so how could you develop, you're not gonna develop a lot for residential use with no water and sewer.
Okay.
And you cannot get it for these lots.
Well, you're saying that's what Newburyport might do, we don't have any control of what Newburyport would allow a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever.
Oh, you certainly do, because all you need to do if they introduced flows to these lots is wave the ACO around, and that administrative consent order wields a lot of power relative to the flows off the island because of the promises that were made to NEPA relative to flows. So it would not happen, it can't.
Even if you go to the zoning board of.
The zoning board of appeals does not have the authority to override the water and sewer and to allow water and sewer to come. They do not control the Newburyport Water and Sewer Department at all, and they cannot waive their requirements.
Okay. Well, I'll still let my comment lie, and you can obviously address it.
That's fine.
I'm not at all convinced, having seen the performance of the zoning board of appeals, both in the city of Newburyport on the island and the town of Newbury on the island, where I would say things that have led to what would appear to be increased flows have in fact gone through. So, healthy skepticism there. I suppose if I need to, I can try and look some things up and put it before the board as a comment. Again, I just see that this proposal is going to result in a lot of traffic, which will not be controlled year-round. And that's a concern, which ultimately has some detriment to the resource, because it will be off, and people will go around the gates, and I don't think it's a good idea. Again, I don't think it's been a demonstrated need that this has happened. I mean, I've been on the island for only 20 years, and certainly I've seen comings and goings. I had to wait for the tide to change, and then I'd leave, and that would be it. I think there may be other routes that could be considered, but I didn't come here to argue the merits of the other routes or the analysis that was done, but rather just to not be in favor of this 14th Street evacuation route. Finally, 14th Street often has significant water ponding in its own, as it sits there right now, and that would be an impediment to the flow of traffic, I would submit, as a real concern.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how you want to deal with that, but certainly as cars, perhaps with high speed, go sloshing through there, they'll be abutting, the former Fairbrother residents and mine for that matter, and maybe others further up and down the road. And I think that's a concern because of that water going back and forth that this plan doesn't talk about at all, or perhaps doesn't realize is going on.
Would you like to leave your comments with us?
Yes, I would. I was just trying to see if there's any other points I wanted to bring up or reemphasize.
You're welcome. Would you like to address any of the comments?
Yes, yeah, no, certainly. So, first of all, with regard to the need for the project, anybody who's seen, back when the Bizarre home was lost and the beach center eroded, it happened fast. There wasn't a lot of time to react to it. The town tried to dump a bunch of sand in and it kept coming. They tried soft solutions and it kept coming. You can't wait until then to try to find out what your alternative way to get people, off the North End Boulevard end of the island. Because basically, once the beach center is severed, that's pretty much it for getting out of there. So, the need may not have happened in the last 100 years, but sea level is rising more than it did, than it was 100 years ago.
It was flooded twice last year.
Right, so overwash on the beach center is one thing, but, complete severing of that access means you need a backup. And you have backups on the southern end. You've got other ways to get to Southern Boulevard. You don't have it on the northern end. So that's one item. The other thing is, a lot of the issues that were raised about use, about whether this is a temporary or permanent or, two-lane highway, really don't have anything to do with the Wetland Protection Act performance standards. And I know that the DEP had a goal of impacts under 5,000 square feet, but that's not really even in the regs. That's in the regs as a limit on BBW. The commission can approve any number for alteration in the dune, as far as I know. You just have to meet the performance standards. So what I would like to point out is we meet the performance standards for what we're proposing. What we're proposing for an access road is actually a lower impact than many homes that have been approved. When you take, you know, the area, things like driveways and parking areas and footprints of homes, patios, stuff like that, very similar to what we're talking about for impacts here. This is not an egregious impact, and the location is actually one where it's really minimal changes to the topography. There are areas here that are 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 slope already. There will be more when this is done than currently exist, but they're generally relatively stable. Sand moves in the dune system, and yeah, sand will continue to move in the dune system. That's kind of part of the point. Any areas where that sand is moved on site can be replanted after the work is done with American beach grass, which will help to hold things in place. But in the end, when you look at the performance standards, we really meet the performance standards here. And that's really what the whole thing's about. The bylaw performance standards are more aimed at structures. There's not really anything in the bylaw that really gets into detail about this. So that's why my narrative, addendum doesn't really address any bylaw performance standards, because it's really more about lot coverage with buildings and things like that. In terms of the Wetland Protection Act performance standards that apply here, there's no performance standards for land subject to coastal storm flows, which is one resource area that part of this is within. And then there are the dune performance standards, which we've addressed. And I would argue that we've come up with a really good plan for addressing the impacts to vegetation, which were really the primary performance standard included that apply to this area, as well as the movement of sand and floodwaters and all that. And all that can move through here. And then the barrier beach performance standards, which basically say you gotta comply with the dune performance standards. So we really comply with the performance standards that this commission is about. If an abutter or a member of the town or anybody wants to talk about how this should be used, who should have access, whether or not there should be a gate, things like that. To me, those are town management issues. Those are issues that should be brought to the town fathers and to the town administrator, and there should be things that are dealt with at a different level. For the commission, we're asking you to look at the fact that we are doing this through a dune, the impacts on the dune, and the fact that we've fully mitigated the impacts of the dune, and we've also minimized before we even get to mitigation. So it's really a project that, when the need is there for it, you'll be thankful you got it. And if it gets built and doesn't get used for 100 years, that's a good thing.
Certainly is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak?
I got,
Sure, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, it's just, there's a lot of information here that's, I'm still kind of, where do you go on the western side here after you go through this construction? How does that connect up with existing streets?
You mean here?
No, the other way.
Oh. So,
I think I got my compass rose pointing in the right direction.
yeah, so the road comes down here. You're talking about what happens here?
It just seems to go, it looks like through areas that are somewhat grown over. I don't know what streets, Market streets, what land does the town own? There's a lot of stuff to kind of pick out of this.
Yeah, so I think the thing to do is if you look at the existing drive, it basically uses an existing drive.
That the town owns?
I think
Yeah, it goes through town.
All this
Town
land,
property.
these are all town-owned properties,
Yeah.
up to here.
Okay.
And this is a developed, I believe it's a roadway, I believe we plow it, but it's how these folks right here access their homes. They don't come in from 14th, they
Right.
come in from this end. So this dotted line here says gravel, that
It's all
exists.
existing.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
right. And the other thing, I did mention plowing in one other context. Not that the town has any plans to plow it, but when I come up with a mitigation plan for anything, a driveway, a roadway, I typically try to take into account, well, what if it's plowed? So my plantings start 3 feet off the right of way, and then I plant shrubs when it gets. So the idea is, if it gets plowed, I mean, what if we have an emergency in the winter? Then it'll get plowed, right? So I just wanna make sure that my plantings will be resilient and still be there after the thing is plowed, if it ever is. So that was the other context in which that was brought up.
So I see 2 to 1 on the side slope, and isn't 3 to 1, isn't that sort of what we've always kind of settled on for these beach sand areas?
We don't usually deal with slopes on it, because very seldom do you allow that kind of
I'm just
impact, so.
thinking to the beachfront, you know, things seem to kind of settle out at a 3 to 1. And I'm kind of, wondering about the choice of 2 to 1.
Normally, if we're doing dune restoration, we're adding sand, our goal is to get a 3 to 1. There are times where we get 2 to 1 on the side of driveways and things like that. And you can even you can find relatively stable dune forms that are 1 to 1. You know, like if you go out to the undeveloped portion of the refuge, they're pretty common. But yeah, we do usually try for 3 to 1. The problem is in this site, you'd be chasing grade, I think.
Yeah, and we're trying to minimize impact to abutting properties as well. There's no
Well,
reason to lay back a big.
I think you're trying to minimize impacts, just if you've underestimated the amount of disturbance, because if you go 2 to 1, if it happened to end up 3 to 1, your scope moves out and you've done more disturbance to the dune. What I'm trying to figure out, I'm looking at trying to make sense of this, elevation profile here too.
Sure.
And how much cut, how much fill, and I mean, it does look like.
Yeah, there's almost a net zero cut and fill
Well,
if you
there is,
balance
but
it.
you've taken a couple feet off up there.
Yeah, this is
and-
the mound right at the end of the road where you see this cut happen on the.
Okay, I didn't, that's
Yep, that's, this mound corresponds directly with
in
this
the
grade.
existing road.
And this mound is where typically snow plowing gets pushed and left, and that's kind of just developed into a mound over time. And yes, that, obviously, you're not gonna get an emergency access vehicle in if you climb real steep for 2 feet and immediately come back down, so that you're kind of pushing through
So
this
it
initial
almost
mound.
seems like these grades do not extend beyond the roadway very far, it's just a big pile in the middle of the. 10
Yeah,
foot
pretty
right.
much. It is a little higher on the northern side of the road, and that's why this appears like a cut.
But these areas, so could you just show me where you start off of this roadway, where is that on this elevation profile?
Okay, this point right here, where you leave 14th Street,
Is there,
that
when
location right
you
here.
get down to here, what station are you at?
We're stationed.
I think what I'm,
Yep, station 200 is right here, right at the edge of the structure. It's right here. You're just a few, 6 inches below grade, but 6 inches in a 10-foot wide road, you could be 6 inches low on the left side, 6 inches high on the right.
this
It's
is
lost.
the area that concerned me, and again,
Yeah.
that's in the road, but it seems like the rest of it, you're only talking 8 inches or a foot or something like that.
Yeah, and that's just a center line shot too, so like I was mentioning, you might be a little high on the left side of the roadway and a little low on the other, so the balance of cut and fill, if you calculate it out with the contours, is like a net zero, everything stays.
I guess the end of my comment is just that if there's considerable cut in here, and maybe it ends up not being 2 to 1, that maybe there's more impact there than what we're, sort of talking about, but, you can probably convince me and others here that that's not the case. I think you've already made the case, but.
Yeah, I'd have to say you can get to about where that turn is. If it wasn't soft sand, you could drive it pretty readily.
Yeah.
Your vehicle's gonna be flat, you're not gonna be uncomfortable at all, except the sand's so soft, you'd be spinning your wheels right now. But say you just surfaced it up until you get to that bend. I think the reason you're seeing the fill and cut going on there is because you're trying to make the grade change as minimal as possible along a longer stretch. And it's really to get that one hump that's kind of right up in here.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'm done trying to figure that out, but,
But I think if you think about all the various locations where you could connect that eastern end of the island to the western end of the island in this area, it's a really minimal change compared to what you'd end up with in other locations.
Yeah, the grade changes, with the exception of this spot right here, are extremely minor.
no, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. Yeah, the only thing, I mean, I don't see any replanting. You've said that, you know, you like to go 3 feet off. You know, you are gonna have some disturbed slopes there where you're cutting.
Yeah.
And where you're filling. And, I don't,
Could we add dune grass to the slope?
Yeah, I mean, we can,
And that,
we can
I
basically,
don't know if that makes any sense. It just seems like,
well, there's a normal, I think it's a standard condition that any areas, any vegetation disturbed during construction is replanted.
It's replanted, but I thought you showed that anyway.
Yeah, no, we show some areas, here, we showed, these are our planting areas, I
But
thought there was,
I thought you showed up in there too. What you got for color up in there?
yeah, let me, actually, it's better, it shows better on this plan, the green areas.
yeah, I don't think there's green in here.
Yeah, we can, you know, we would accept a condition, or we could add,
We've got a month, why don't we just modify that?
yeah.
Put that in there.
There's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and I think, you know, we can proactively, I know I put the native sand, you know, if we have to go down and put you know, cut anywhere down there to put the road base in, any of that sand will stay on site. So what we can do is we can just add to the narrative addendum that any areas that are impacted during construction and any areas, any of the slopes from grading would all be planted.
That'll all get caught in the standard order, but it's good to have it right on the plan.
Right, but that would be over and above our mitigation numbers, just sort of the stability
Yeah.
kind of thing. But,
Long-term maintenance.
yeah, but there are plenty of areas on this site existing that are 2 to 1. There's even some areas that are very short, but right as you leave 14, where there's almost a vertical cut off to the right that's existing. So, you know, sand has a nice way of staying when it's not right in the ocean.
I have a question. If this is a emergency access, and it's not gonna be plowed during the winter, not gonna be maintained at all?
My guess is that the town wouldn't plow until they need it. They may, I
Okay.
mean, that's an
So-
administration issue, but
So my concern is when this is a sheet of snow, and you have 2 feet of snow, and they wanna plow the road, the plow driver doesn't know where the road is, and takes out all the vegetation on the side, not realizing that he's no longer on the road or whatever. To me, it'd make a lot of sense to have some sort of markers for the plow, so they know where the road is, cause
Yeah.
looking at a sheet of snow, you can't see.
Almost like the reflective ones. you see in
Yeah,
the driveway.
that just,
Yeah.
cause he's taking out all the plantings that were,
Sure.
all these great things we're doing to try to make up for it, but,
it's a good point, Kevin.
yeah. Unless it's gonna be maintained, and then,
Yep.
you know, then you can always see
Then
it.
it wouldn't
but-
matter, but yeah.
Yeah.
Any more comments? Mr. Mangin?
A couple, maybe you can illuminate me, some of that discussion about the 3-to-1 slope versus the 2-to-1 slope, and sitting in the back and not seeing the plan, to me it sounded like 2-to-1 versus 3-to-1 might be an increased impact. And there was a desire to have the slope be maximized so that the impact would be less and get below the magic 4,500, 5,000 square foot thing, but yet we want to have something that works and is stable. So, and again, I can't really make the comment because I don't understand the significance of going from 3-to-1 to 2-to-1 to 2-to-1 to 3-to-1, depending how you look at it. And I'm sort of concerned that if the more gentle slope is what's needed, well, then you may be looking at something that does increase the footprint of the operation. That sort of gets me to how, with some of what I've heard represented, I'm wondering whether if the Concon would entertain coming down and taking a look at this site, because again, my eyeballing of the site and Mr. Romano's eyeballing of the site has that the right-of-way extends into the steep part of the dune field that's existing and would need to be supported. And I'm not hearing that discussion here, but yet that's what I think is going on, given my firsthand look at the site, because while I live there, I've also heard some discussion, I need to look this up, and I would urge the board to do it as well, the discussion about the driveway, the existing driveway that homeowners use for access, and that my understanding is that that is not town land, and at one time the town was talking about not plowing that because it wasn't town land, and that gets into how this access road may not be part of the town land. I think we just need to clarify it.
I think what you might be misunderstanding is the fact that it might not be an accepted roadway, and that's why the town would not be able to plow it, but it is certainly town land.
Including the driveway area.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
because again, my understanding from previous owners that used to live in one of the.
But see, if it's not an approved roadway, we can't spend taxpayers' money on it, so it was a whole different issue relative to plowing it.
Right.
It wasn't an ownership issue, it was whether it's accepted road and we could put taxpayer money on it.
Okay, but still want to sort of look up the ownership issues, and I can always do that as
You
a
could-
subsequent comment to the ones I've made.
Sure.
But again, I would really urge the board to come down and to walk the site, particularly going in and out. And that gets me to how, leaving aside the issue of trying to not trigger an impact which would get the state interested in what's going on down there. When I hear the stuff about, the corners that are being proposed to be made, I said, well, gee, does that really make sense in an emergency access, emergency route being used by many vehicles, including, bigger
Not a
vehicles?
conservation issue.
What I'm
Not
getting is,
conservation issue.
but where I'm going is there may indeed be a better route for the Conservation Commission to entertain, which is strictly to go down 12th Street would be a straight shot, going up over the dune that connects 12th and Sandy Way, which is really the same street, and then going through.
There'll be some comments, there's some comments relative to that in the alternatives analysis that was looked at.
I understand that, but after heard this discussion, particularly some discussion about the tight, tight is an adjective, I take it back, but the corners that need to be made sound like they could be somewhat problematic at least, in stark contrast to what may be a better route to take, which is to go down 12th Street, given the concerns about access. Because after all, this is a project that's involving access, and these corners may not be the best solution for emergency access to the island. And that's what I'm thinking, 12th Street may be a better one, and maybe that's a comment on the proposal. That, yes, I understand that it would be more square footage being impacted, but it may be a better project than making the turns on 14th Street into the driveway. So that would be another comment I'd make.
Okay, thank you. Have a good night. Would anyone else like to speak? It would be my recommendation to the board. DEP is taking an interest in our plan. It was delivered to them this afternoon. This isn't a fire that we need to put out tonight, so it would be my recommendation to the board that we continue this to the January 15th meeting and let DEP have a chance to comment, and then we can react to their comments if need be.
Given that there's no time pressure here, I mean, is it worth going out there and taking a look?
For me, I will go out with the board if they want to. I've been there plenty of times, so I'm very familiar with the area. If the board wants to go out organized as a board, absolutely, I'm glad to do that. If you want to go out on your own and view the site and take a walk down it prior to the next meeting, that's fine also, whatever your choice is.
Is the project, is it staked out?
Yeah, it was, as of a week and a half ago when we did the vegetation work. Now, assuming the stakes have been left in place by folks around there.
Stake thieves have not been around?
You know, stakes.
No laughing, stay away from the stakes.
You know, look, the other thing that we can do, if you wanted to do, or if somebody wants to go out there and let me know in advance, I can load the CAD file into my GPS and we can walk, and I can virtually walk you on the road.
Do you want to do that right now? Do you want to make those arrangements right now?
I mean, I don't see why we wouldn't want to. We've got time, and, apparently it's a little bit controversial as far as the state goes, so they're as informed as we can be, I would think.
You want to look at a date?
It's supposed to be warm on Christmas
Next Tuesday work.
That's a great suggestion, Tom.
Yeah, no, I'll be in the woodshed.
Yeah, really, we all will be. The week of the 7th, maybe?
It's supposed to be cold that week.
Stop. It's gonna be cold from now till May.
Yeah, I prefer anything but Thursday that week.
Anything but Thursday? Anybody else have any days that they can't make that week?
I'm traveling most of January, so,
Most of January?
so I'm very familiar with it, buying two of the houses that are on this.
Okay,
So I'm
so
very
you're familiar with the site, if you wanna go down on your
Yeah.
own, certainly you're free to do that.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a date that is not good for them in January, on the week of the 7th? All right, do you wanna call it the 7th?
Sure.
All right. What time? Tom, you wanna try and get your day in before you get down there, say 2 o'clock, so before it's dark, but no,
You pick whatever time works for you guys, I'll just make work.
how about you folks, when can you make it down there? I realize that, you know, you have jobs and everything, but it gets dark at 4, so.
Yeah.
I'm open to also-
If you haven't organized, then we can just.
Yeah,
go
I'm
down there,
comfortable
so.
walking it myself. I mean, if I can take this or something.
You wanna just, there's plenty of copies that you
Yeah.
can certainly, the
I can
board
take
can,
that.
the board can have a copy.
If
Yeah,
this, if the
and
stakes
what-
are there, I
Yeah,
can,
we'll,
Yeah, and you'll see,
we'll swing by and check and make, if the stakes are popped out, we can place them back in again over the next.
you will definitely see the big stand of shrubs. So if you just kind of walk the other side, there's a boat that's kind of parked right in there.
It's in the picture.
Coming right along the side of the boat, bending around. It's pretty obvious if you've got the plan in hand.
Okay. Then it sounds to me as though we're leading down the path of doing it on your own and prior to the next meeting.
Yeah, if you haven't failed attempt or whatever, let Doug know and we'll figure out what to do.
Might I add, I'd be happy to have a phone call, or Alamano would, and I'd be happy to join the informal walk around that you'd be doing, not as the board.
That's
And I'm in
fine.
I'm in the phone book.
That's fine, Steve, but it sounds to me as though everybody's gonna be going down on their own. I likely won't go down again, I've been down enough, so if one of them wanna give you a call, that's up to them.
Right, I'm retired, I have all the time in the world. So,
That's good for us.
So did you guys vote to continue? Did you actually take the vote to continue?
I don't think we did. I recommended that we continue, but I don't believe it went to a vote. So I will entertain a motion to continue this to the January 15th meeting.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, happy holidays.
Same to you. We have a continued notice of intent to replace a deck platform, conduct landscape work, and after-the-fact approval for repairs to an existing revetment from Jacqueline McKenna at 11 Riverside. There is still, I had a conversation with their representative today, and there's still a little bit of work to do. I started to go down the lot coverage and take a good look at this. There's only 1603 allowed. They're already existing at 1780 without looking at stairs and things like that. So there's some inconsistencies with the plans and past approvals and what's on the site right now. So that's going to take a little bit of time to work through. So it would be my recommendation that we grant a continuance to 11 Riverside to the January 15th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have a continued notice of intent to renovate and expand an existing pier of 160 square feet from Riverfront Marine at 292 High Road. Good evening, Mr. Boyle.
Low red outfit, no tripod.
There you go. Well, you can use ours if you want. Okay.
My name is Ed Boyle, I'm here on behalf of Walton family and Riverfront. Scope of the work is to repair this pier right here, replace the piling that deteriorated, the frame and a new cap. The wood piles here are pretty much gone by. The headers on the top are gone by. essentially, what we plan to do.
Thank you.
You don't mind me saying.
Oh, absolutely not. Have a seat.
The first order is a utility building here that houses the electrical panels and the fuel, beginnings of the fuel termination valves, and there's also an oil, waste oil receptacle on the side. That's gonna come out, so it gives us access to the pier. We're gonna leave the pier, use it as a template for our new piling. The problems being, as I see it, there's a lot of piling in the way, more than is shown on the plan right here. So that the new frame and the new piling will be steel. We'll be able to make greater spans because of the steel. So it's showing, I think he's got 13 piles on the plan. It'll be 13 or less, and most likely it'll be less, maybe 8 or 9. We use the existing deck as a template. We drive those piles every place we can get in, barring obstructions. There's a lot of stuff there, there's a lot of riprap, and there's a lot of older piling. We'll get in as many as we can. Next step is to cut free the deck. We'll pick it up with a sling and chokers, pick it up in one piece. It's not gonna be dismantled over the water. Pick it up, swing it over here, move it up to the upland, and then put it in the dumpster, get it right out of the way. The new steel frame will be fabricated in the yard. We'll bring it down, set it in one piece, pretty clean. So the likelihood of doing any damage or having anything in the water is
Pretty minimal.
Yeah. We'll extract any of the, once the old frame is gone, we'll extract any of the piles that we can get out with a vibro. Any that we can't, because the tops are so withered, we'll cut at the mud line. And there's probably in the order of maybe 20 piles here that'll come out.
Yeah, it's kind of a mess there. It's a patchwork quilt at the moment.
Yeah, it's, they did
It did what they needed to do over
Yeah.
time.
Band-Aid over Band-Aid.
Yeah. They didn't really address the resource area. The engineer made the plan, and so Ed's expertise with the piling certainly helped explain this, but what the board's got here is the board's got banks of land under the ocean, pond, streams, rivers, lakes, creeks that underline an anadromatous, catadromatous fish run. And what our responsibility to that is the fish, the accessibility of spawning areas, the volume and the rate of the flow within the migratory routes, and the nursery grounds and the spawning grounds. I wish Ben was here, but in looking at the river and the species that use the river, if any of these banks have an adverse effect, or they cannot have an adverse effect by obstructing the mitigation of the fish run, I don't think they run up the bankings. I think they run up the river. Changing the volume or the rate of flow within the water, I don't think that's going to happen due to these pilings. We've got a decreased number of pilings, not an increased number of pilings. And impairing the capacity of the nursery habitat to sustain the various stages of life. I think that most of the stages of much of the life ends up down in the estuary or up in the upper reaches of the Parker River. Again, I wish Ben was here, but I find this to be a pretty minor impact to this area down here, given
Certainly
the
no
work.
increase in that.
There's certainly no, well, there is a little bit of shading. They are, that area that's closest to you when you're looking at the plan, that's a 5-foot addition. So there would be some increased shading there. I wouldn't imagine that the shading, especially this close to the estuary of 160 square feet, would change the temperature of the water to any degree that you could measure.
And it'll only be over water at high tide.
It's all over water, yeah. Yeah. It's over, at low tide, there's mud there.
Right, that's what I'm saying, only at high tide is it actually shading water where the
Correct.
fishery would be.
Correct.
So I mean,
If anybody wants to look at this, they're welcome to.
So the existing building is gonna, this one's gonna be taken down temporarily? Oh, just picked up?
Pick right up, moved out.
Oh, moved out.
Yeah, because it's in our way for access, and it's on the old frame,
So it'll be put back on the new frame,
a new building.
a new building?
Same footprint, but a new building.
And will this result in an electrical permit having to be pulled for this?
The way we were gonna go at it,
So all your connections,
Excuse me?
all your connections go through there, correct?
yes,
Okay,
yeah,
all right, so you're gonna have to do something, so you'll be pulling an electrical permit to,
oh, yeah.
all right, that's,
I mean, that's a small town out here.
that, exactly, that's good news, okay.
There's a lot of power there.
Yes, I realize that.
So, we picked this right up and out of the way. I mean, Billy Robichaud would certainly have something to do with it.
Good, okay.
Certainly.
Okay.
That goes away, it gives us reach and access, and it's not in our way, so.
The board have any other questions or concerns for the applicant?
And this is the only one I've got, John, it's just this here.
Exactly, yes,
Okay.
yeah, just that blow up. At one point, they had, it was an old drawing, and, well, right here you can see it, they show these as new.
Yeah. I thought
These
there was
pieces,
something
they're
there.
not new, they're existing. Okay.
And, D, comments at all?
DEP did not comment on this, I don't think, or maybe we don't have them yet.
I think they did.
I thought you did too, I thought you. Maybe they haven't commented on it yet. Do we have a DEP number? No. You know, Ed, that, I guess that does lead me to a question.
Yes.
The way this thing's kind of been put together, it's taken you to kind of put it all in one place. I wonder if DEP has a complete application of this. Now, this has been before them, or it should have been before them for a couple of months now, because we continued in last month. It seems like they would have got back with either some comments or a DEP number and some comments, and we don't seem to have that yet. So that may be something the applicant has to look into.
Okay, the only thing, and we've done this on lots of different situations, and although, for example, it's showing round pilot, we always supplement a material without, there's not been a lot of discussion about that, it's simply a material change, is the soils and the conditions always determine what pile you use in them.
Oh, sure. I don't have any problem with that, and we don't usually dictate what kind of pile you use.
Right.
If you're using a pile, you want to use wood or steel, that's generally up to you. No, my only reason for mentioning that is we can close this hearing without their comments. But without that number, we cannot write you an order of conditions. And if the applicant hasn't satisfied the conditions with DEP to get that number back, then this thing's just going to sit and it's never going to get written. That's my only not that I need their comments. I don't think that the board needs their comments, and from a legal standpoint, we don't have any standing to hold back a decision relative to that DEP number. You just won't get your order of conditions.
Next
All right,
step.
so, yeah, well, that's something, you know, that next step is a phone call to make sure that DEP's been satisfied and why you don't have a number yet,
Okay.
all right?
So in regards to the opinion of this board,
We can close the hearing. I think we've heard what we need to hear. That's up to the board. We'll go to them in a minute.
Yep.
But again, even if we vote to move forward tonight, we can't move forward until we get that number.
okay,
And there's a chance that they might come back with some,
I'm sorry, Dan.
there's a chance they might come back with some comments that are, you have to do something, make some changes.
Okay.
I don't know.
It's something, I thought we had a DEP number for this.
I really do too.
Yeah, I did too. I'm,
I'm trying to look it up, but the site's not working. So just for my own edification, there is a DEP coming into this because of the Chapter 90 regulations, or is that something separate and apart from?
That's something separate. The Chapter 91 license that he has and anything that he has to do with the Army Corps of Engineers is above and beyond this action. This is just his first local action. And DEP's concerned just because there are resource area, obviously it's, it's a pretty important resource area.
Okay, thanks.
But if they don't have a complaint or an issue, then they would have issued a number, correct?
Yes, well, they can issue number with comments too. So sometimes they'll make if it's real egregious, they generally won't put the number out there. If they have a couple of comments they want you to follow, they'll put the comments out there and they'll put the number out there. You don't have to go with their comments. If you don't, they may intervene. Those comments might be important enough to them that they'll intervene.
Right.
But they can't do anything until you write that order because they don't know what you're coming up with.
Right.
So we can check on that anyways. We'll check on that number and see if we have that number or not. Are there any abutters here? Would anyone like to speak on this project? Any more comments or concerns from the
I
board?
was just gonna mention that, again, relative to the fish, migratory fish,
Mhm.
oftentimes there's a time frame for doing the work. Where
You
it's,
mean spawn?
yeah,
Yeah, there's a TOI, time of year restriction.
and I don't have the expertise to know whether that's, something to be concerned about here or not. Could be or could not be, not. But if we do, for instance, vote on this tonight,
Mhm.
I mean, I think we might at least indicate that we're seeking information about the timing of doing the work, should that be a problem.
If you're concerned about the smells, the seals already took care of them.
Yeah, well, again, I don't have the expertise, but.
Dan, to answer your question, no, you're not gonna get that information because this went to the 2001 appendices and the engineer checked off no, that this is not within the estimated habitat, so we're not going to get that. Yeah, we're not gonna get that.
And if, no more.
No more? Okay. Do you want that information? Okay. Any other comments? Is the board ready to close the public hearing? Then I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion on the project.
Is this when I say negative?
No, that would be for a determination. This is an order of conditions, so you would move to approve. And if there are any special orders, then it would be the time to introduce a special order.
I move to approve. So that generates another meeting?
No, we've closed the public hearing. We have a motion to approve the plan as submitted. Waiting on a second.
Seconded.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Excellent. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And so we'll check tomorrow, we'll check on the DEP number, we'll let you know whether that's issued or not, so you'll know then whether.
Contract with them than we did, correct?
Well, no, but it's not my job to go after that number, it's his. So I would let you know, and then you could let David know, and let the applicant, the representative can go chasing.
Yeah, I would, that would be Joe, too.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Did we do what we wanted to do?
Yes. Yeah.
Need a sign sheet?
Yep.
You may want to take that freedom of speech thing.
Oh, I know it, I know. You just have to learn, you know?
Thank you.
Thank you, have a good night.
You go.
I'm following you.
Okay. Be gentle.
We have a notice of intent for the rehabilitation of the Newbury Upper Green, including but not limited to the installing of a stone walkway around the existing pond, aerating the pond, tree replacement, Placement of benches and bronze cattle statues, as well as minor regrading to allow ADA compliance and maintain existing drainage. From Dr. Keith Abloh at the Upper Green.
How are you?
Fine, how are you
Good to
been?
see everyone. I've been well.
Good to see you.
Vern's gonna do most of the talking, but this is actually, while I am, noted as the moving party here, really Cole Abloh.
Hi, Cole.
Got this whole thing started as a project between him and his friends to rehabilitate not just the Newbury Upper Green, but this is intended to be the first not-for-profit adventure or venture of greener, the E and R are capitalized, like ER, to restore historic greens in New England. So we tapped Vern as our contractor here, and Camet Engineering to help us scope out the project, and we've been lots of places, and now we're here.
Okay, I'm Vern Fisher of Visionary Landscapes, working with Dr. Keith Abloh, Emily Fredette, and his son Cole, who started this endeavor, as he just.
And our executive directors at the back of there, Tiffany Bartholomew.
What they're proposing and what we're proposing is to basically bring the upper green, the common, back to its historical state, where we would replant it with, I actually have a picture that came out of the old Newbury book, of what it once looked like 150, 160 years ago, with the periphery being planted with the majestic elms originally, but of course with Dutch elm disease, we lost them. Now there is silver maples, Norway maples, there's one ash tree, there's a couple linden trees. Many of them are in very poor condition. We're suggesting that we replant the periphery to bring back that majestic state of what it once had looked like, using Zelkova serrata, which is considered more like the new American elm. Why? Because it doesn't have any major disease problems or insect problems. But it has the form that is like the canopy, the upper umbrella form of what the elm had originally had. Working with Tim, he approved that. We originally wanted, just so you know, sugar maples, because we thought that would be fantastic, and I'm still maybe working on that, if we can work with UNH and some of the major growers, because I believe we could possibly still use the sugar maples. He has concerns because of the high water table. But regardless, we will stay with the Zelkova if that's what's approved. If we can come up with the new cultivars, which they have come out with, and we can show that they will survive and do extremely well with that environment, because we're changing the grade slightly by raising it, because right now it's like a big bowl. So we're regrading it so we don't have the puddles, so the water will percolate accordingly and not puddle up. And it'll also be dispensed for the most part, and I have on the opposite side the grading plans, so forth, submitted by Camet. So anyway, on another note, but that's basically what we're trying to do with the trees, is to create that original look. The other is with the primary thing is with the grading. Because as you probably noticed with the last 6 weeks of rain up until recently, there's been an awful lot of puddling. You can't walk through the upper green without walking through puddles unless you're right down near the pond. This whole area collects in different spots. So what we want to do is the water will now come down and go towards the pond. But there will be basically no water to the pond by the time it gets there, because it's relatively flat. It's at about a 2.5%. It's like a ball field when we're done, just enough to shed. The other thing that we came across when we were trying to bring this up is we dealt with all the different boards, and from the Historical Commission to the Little League, and they were concerned, and have been for a long time, certain towns will not play Little League with the town of Newbury and Byfield because of the sun angle with where the current, even though it's not historical, it's been there for a long time, the ball field. But the way the sun angle moves, it blinds the kids. So certain towns will not play us. So they asked us if we would be willing, if we could, reposition the ball field from this corner to another position. We found that it wouldn't block really anyone's view, because all you have is the backstop over here. This is where that historical house is that's set way back, so it's not blocking any of the other views. just so you know of concerns, we did hold a party and a meeting with all the abutters at Dr. Ablow's house. We presented everything, all our proposals and so forth, because we wanted everybody on board and them to know what we were proposing. This was done months ago, so they're aware. By repositioning this, yeah, it's not perfect because of the sun angle, but for the most part, it would be much safer. Also, they're not right on High Road. Being off of Green Street, it's much safer for the kids and so forth. And there's enough room. One of the concerns, just, they said, well, is there enough room if they hit the ball from here to here? What about here? Yes, there is. There's actually more room this way than there is that way. Doesn't really concern the Concom, but just so you know. It's interesting. Okay. So that's one other change. What we also would like to do is we wanted to bring attention to the historical nature of the Upper Green. It was once the training ground. There will be a sign there for the Revolution with Benedict Arnold and so forth. And also this was the main gathering place once the lower common was not big enough. They brought it to the upper common, the historical nature of the Upper Green, as a gathering place for the town fathers and the citizenry. They brought their cattle to the pond, which we now have. It was, if you look in pictures, which I actually have, was a little bit more flooded, but this is where they watered the cattle, the sheep, etc. And they would have their meetings. This is also off the Old Town Newbury book. But of interest, so we want to be able to bring people closer to the pond and use it. We noticed that people, and I know from complaints living here 26 years plus, whatever, that it's hard sometimes, depending on the weather, for people to get around the pond. So we're proposing to put in large, flat, natural Goshen stone on a good, foot of 3/4 inch stone, 10 to 12 inches, so you have really good percolation. That would wrap around the pond with a tight joint so that you can go over it with a wheelchair. You can walk with a walker. We currently have benches around the pond. We're just gonna move those slightly forward. So we're using the existing benches, and then with approval, we may put a couple more benches along the edge so that people can actually sit and enjoy. Right now, they're a little bit set back from, if you actually look where the actual benches are. As well as bringing this large natural stone walkway around the pond. One, it also blends into the earth much better because of the gray, the natural tones, they come out of Maine. Not like brick, which we have all over Newburyport and so forth. This is gonna blend in with the landscape. So it's not like popping out, which red tends to do. The grays and the natural colors will blend in with the existing grade and the grounds. We wanted to bring attention to the memorial and with the flags. People don't even know the flag's there. People who have lived here most of their lives are like, oh, there's a flagpole. We would like to bring attention to the memorial and the people that have given their lives from the town of Newbury, from the Revolutionary War right up through the Iraq War. And one way of doing that is to be able to create a promenade wrapped around so that the Boy Scouts and the veterans and other people can come, and when they have their tributes and so forth, they could stand around it. Right now it's grass, it's fine. We would just like to put the stone promenade around it and then plant behind it with hydrangeas or a native plant, something that would do well, that would bloom all summer long. We're suggesting the hydrangeas because they bloom throughout the summer. If we have a heavy snow load and they break, they come right back up. They're really low maintenance, but it's really in the backdrop to pull attention to the flagpole and the memorial to make it stand out. Also, they don't get very high, so you'll be able to see over them. They don't grow about yay high. So that's the idea there. The other thing was to bring the walkway to the existing memorial that's been there, the rock, forever. It's actually in this photo from the 1800s, very early 1800s. And a lot of people see it, but no one ever reads it. So we're hoping that people will actually read the memorial and come down and pay attention to it. And it also gives you access if you're coming from this route, etc., walking, you can have a safe travel, because there is no walkway right now on either side of the road. So that's safety and also to bring attention. And also planting just a few hydrangeas right behind it, again, because people don't really notice it. So if you look at this picture, just by putting a few behind it will, again, give a backdrop and make it pop, especially in the summer, which is when most people use it. The other thing was to bring a life-size bronze cattle. And the reason is because,
Why not?
why not? Well, really,
Why not?
yeah. We would have like granite curbing, so it's 6 inches high, and then plant it with grasses. And one of the cattle offset near the pond would be grazing. The other one would be heading towards the water. In those little areas with the grass and so forth, we would then have a historical sign about yay high so people can read that this is the original watering hole in Newbury and gathering place for the town. The town of Newbury, some people know, some people don't know, but it was actually started as a cattle town. The king in England had granted the land to a company that was a cattle company, I believe in Wiltshire, England. And they sent the ships and the cattle at the same time down and up the Raleigh River, and they settled in the Parker River here in Newbury as a land grant as a cattle town from day one. So we thought it would be kind of neat. It also differentiates the difference between Newburyport, and a lot of people kind of get us confused, and Newbury, because it's an agricultural town still to this day, which I think is a wonderful thing, and to bring attention to that. So there would be two that are offset here, and one which is by the other memorial, which would be laying down in the ground, and again a sign. And we're hoping that that'll bring the kids and the families and people again, and will pull attention to the memorial, pull attention to the history of the town, and it'll bring people together for gatherings, etc., etc. We were very conscious, and we worked for the hand tub so that this would be open, so we did get approval of that as well. So they've signed off on it, because we know that with the history and so forth, we wanted to keep this open. There are now 19 trees. 2 of them are pretty much dead if you look at them, which are on the water along this edge. It's really not a good place for them with all the wires, etc. It's really a terrible idea. They're dead anyway. They should be removed. And Tim agrees. So we have 16 trees that we're proposing to replant. We're proposing to plant at 5.5 inch caliper, which at 4.5 feet high, which is test height, is 5.5 inches. So they're big trees right away, because we know there's going to be concern. You're taking down trees, whether they're hazardous or not. What are you going to replace them with, and how long do we have to wait? Well, we'll be going with 20, 25-foot trees instantaneously. They're not cheap, but we're going to plant them so that we get that effect right away. And it has been brought up, could we do that where a couple this year, a few later? The whole thing is to get the historical look of the original common. We would like to have them all planted at large caliper right away at the same time, so they all mature at the same time. So you don't have little trees next to big huge trees, because then we're going to be waiting for 40 years to get the same effect, 30 years, where we can start right away. Having large trees instantly, and they all mature at the same rate, to get that historical feel. The other thing is we're proposing to aerate the pond with similar to what you see when you go to a golf course. We're going to be running a electrical line. There's actually an electrical pole with the town here. It'll go underground, and it just plugs in, and they hook it, and then they take it out in the winter. So it's not going to interfere at all with the skating, which a few weeks ago people were skating, it's been so cold, etc. So that it will remain so people can use it for activities, etc. But we can unhook it, and it's really to aerate it and keep it clean. That's the whole idea. So it's not this big fountain, it's just an aerating fountain that you see very often on a golf course. Let's see, am I forgetting anything, crew?
I think you pretty much covered it. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. This is a zero cost to the town. his band of Indians is gonna be raising the money with their dads, and lots of people have already donated. That money has largely been exhausted through the process of permitting and so forth, but the good news is that the bigger donors have been waiting on the sidelines for final approval, because they didn't want to come in the banks and so forth as donors until they know it's a go.
Okay. Vern, talk a little bit about the bank. So the resource area that we've got, which would be the bottom of the D section of the pond there. When you put these river rock in there, and it may do you well to change your typical in your plan, because it shows 3 1/4 inch pavers. So people come in and see that, it's not what you're saying it is, so they get confused when they see the details that don't match what the narrative is. So take a look at those. But those river stone, when you come around that corner, I take it that you're gonna leave a small section of that bank in between the stone and the water?
Yes, there's
So-
actually, I think it's, yeah.
5 feet?
It's 5,
So-
6 feet set back from the existing high water mark now, so
Okay.
it's set off.
So how do those edges, what are the elevations of those edges? So that inside edge,
Yeah,
that is gonna be maybe exposed, does that sit right down flush with the existing
With the
grass?
existing grade, yep, and
Okay.
then it slopes up at 2% to the high side of the walkway.
Okay.
That is ADA compliant.
Stormwater changes little. The other issue I had, and I did call, it was at Normandu Associates,
You
that did
called,
the,
Maureen.
I called Maureen, yeah. Just to the south of the pond, where Vern talked about they're collecting this is more for the board's information, where they have it on the plan as mud, and then there's a little ditch that goes back into the pond. My concern was that that was bordering vegetative wetland. It's constantly saturated, it's got 5 to 6 feet of extremely dense soils, and there's water table 6 to 18 inches from the ground, so that makes a wetland. So I called up Maureen, and they said that it was funny I should ask, because they spent a considerable amount of time looking at that. It would mean nothing to this project, it doesn't make any difference. What the difference would be is if someone around the green or another project was proposed, to know that's BVW and to be able to protect it, set back from it is something that we need to do, that we're supposed to do under 1055. But that area was so disturbed, they found coal ash in it, they found that the town of Newbury filled it with all kinds of things. So it was their professional opinion that that would not flag as a wetland under 1055. So I did go down that route with them. I think the other thing that's gonna be important is your SWIP is gonna be real important to us, because I think that the one thing we're concerned with is showing up your stormwater pollution
yeah.
prevention plan, which comes from the engineer.
Yes, right.
And it's sort of a guideline to whoever's doing it, what you're going to do to protect your resource areas.
Yeah.
I can make myself look stupid with no help. If I drive by that pond and it's brown someday, I'm gonna be in serious trouble. So we wanna make sure that that SWIP report is uptight, and that things are going to be, that the silt is gonna be cared for around there. Maybe some kind of construction sequence or construction details might be good for you to come up with, so that, are you gonna disturb the whole thing at once? Are you gonna do it in stages, so you leave a little grass around the pond and you do your grading and then you replant? There are some ways that you could maybe segment it. If that's too expensive, how are you gonna protect the pond if the whole thing's dirt? So those,
now just to answer that question,
Sure.
because I had thought that all through well in advance, is we're actually gonna do it in sections. So really, the very first thing that we need to do, because of the grades, is there's an existing concrete wall that's here. And I don't know if I mentioned it, I know I didn't, but we are going to build on top of that, because we need to raise it slightly by about 10 inches. Because the grade of the actual road, on High Road, is higher, and everything comes off the road right now. Some of it goes into where there's a catch basin over here, which we are gonna still direct over, but it goes into the pond. So we wanna prevent that. One way of preventing that is with proper grading, but we need to raise that wall. Also, there's some cracks in it and so forth, so we're just gonna repair a little bit on top and the back, so that we mitigate that. So the water is no longer going down into the pond, which it is currently. The other thing is, to answer your question, is we would like to do this area first, and then we will do it in sections. And we would have the whole thing cordoned off where we have our silt fence, we'll also have our hay bales, and we will have fencing around it. So we're doing a section, we don't wanna take it so that people can't use the pond. I don't want, so we have a big dirt bowl going around it. So, no, we're gonna do it in sections and then continue our way around.
That narrative, that language would be real good for the commission to have.
Okay.
That would give us a lot of comfort to know that that's gonna be done that way. I'm glad you thought it through.
Yeah.
I noticed that you're talking about High Road and raising that wall a little bit. You're taking off the vertical granite that's about 4 feet out. What effect is that gonna have of that water coming down there now, the water that you're talking about, you're shutting it off to the two sides?
Well, right now, the water comes down here, and we would now be shedding it towards the street, and it all naturally comes down into this catch basin.
Gotcha, so it's gonna go the other way.
It's going away from the pond.
Perfect, okay.
So everything, shed it towards the street, and it naturally goes to the catch
The
basin.
catch basin goes out to Parker Street and then dumps into
It
the,
actually goes somewhere.
yes, it does. Yeah, that catch basin does. Oh, that reminds me of another question I have. I think that the invert is at, and I'm gonna make up the first number, but it's 29.25, I think. The elevation of the water in the pond is 29.50, so it's 3 inches higher than the invert. How did that happen?
I'll have to check the plan.
Yeah.
Refer to the engineers.
I thought it was so odd, I started to look on the internet today, don't maybe ponds have a normal, just like glass full of water, you know? Maybe the two numbers got mixed up, but I saw that and picked up on that. The board have,
Does this impact the parking at all?
No,
Because
no,
I mean, it's gonna be more of an attraction than it is now. Where are those extra people gonna park?
Well, no, we're actually 25 feet off. Right now, depending on where the trees are, the current existing trees, we actually are setting it back, one, because we're away from the wires, primarily so we don't disturb the canopy of the tree at maturity, but also it allows more parking so that people can park. Right now, they park over here anyway, but we'll be setting the trees back further, 22 feet to be exact is what it is.
that gonna be enough for, if they start to park under there, and we don't maybe spread those trees out in some areas and give them a place to park, are they gonna be driving over the roots?
No.
Okay.
No, that's the whole purpose, yeah. That's why we've set them back, one, because there's wires over on this side and so forth, but also so that the cars can park underneath and not disturb the tree.
Where does the water come and go from the pond?
Where is the water, you mean, how is it fed?
I know.
It's underground,
Well, the water, that's water table.
yeah, and it
So
comes up and down.
what that was when we showed up was behind the fire station, you've got that pond, that big cut over there. That water came all the way across High Road, right through the green, across Hanover Street, out where that wetland is, just the other side of, not Tory Lane, that little lane that's just behind where the old pharmacy used to be. And all the way out to Little River. So we filled it and we interrupted it, we made a mess out of it. That there drains out Parker Street, if you can believe it, because Parker Street goes like this. And it gets so deep out there, you wouldn't want to fall in the manhole. It looks about like this when you look down it. So that goes in the northeast corner, there's an invert there. It falls in that invert and then it goes out Parker Street, it goes into Little River.
So it'll pretty much always stay at a certain level.
Well, no, it'll stay, well, it can't get too high, but it can, if the groundwater drops out, you've seen it before with very little water in it, so it can drop out underneath it.
Last summer, it's the lowest I've ever seen it, and I think most people, it was the lowest we've ever seen it.
Who's gonna maintain this once you guys have done this wonderful job?
Well, it'll be just as easier to maintain than it is now.
And the towns agreed to that?
Yeah.
They're gonna mow it?
Yeah, well, they do now. I mean, so there's really no increased maintenance to it. Yeah.
No, but we are gonna watch over it for the maintenance for the first several years, and then the town will take it over eventually.
Yeah.
Are the cows gonna be something the kids can climb on?
Yes.
Yes, they
Oh,
vibrate and rock.
Full 8 seconds.
The fun part is, and this is just me as a designer, but I get excited about it. I've been very excited about it because I think that it's gonna be like the ducks
Yeah.
in Boston Common. And you always see the pictures of the Boston Common, they have the swan boats and they have the ducks. You know, stupid little thing with these statues, but people are gonna go by and say, oh, the cows, and I believe that for generations to come, you'll have young children. Remember, Dad, when you went and took me down there and we sat on top of the cow and you took the pictures, and this is gonna go down in the memory banks and family gatherings, and as a, I believe, really, anyone that thinks of Newbury in the future may think of the Upper Green and those cows, and really bring attention to the fact that this was one of the first original gathering places in the United States.
Yeah.
One of the very first towns. And they trained for, you know, well, they slept overnight. For the revolution, I think that's so neat. And that's really what we want to do. And it helps to separate Newbury from Newburyport, and people will realize this is an agricultural town to this day.
Are all the current trees coming down?
Yes.
Not the town Christmas tree. That's funny.
A lot of people kind of wanted to, but we decided that was, we'll deal with that another day. You don't mind, if they really want it down, and the town says, fine, but we're leaving the Christmas tree. The other one is half dead, the large that's next to it, there's nothing, that's gotta come down, it's dead.
Are there any butters here? Would anyone like to speak on this project at this time? Yes.
Jan Forrest, Historical Commission. I wish you guys would stop bantering around that we're all like, right up there with you, because we're all like not. I'm confused on one thing you said. It said that the trees are gonna be 4.5 feet high and then they're gonna be 25 feet high. Did I?
Oh, no, 4.5 inch caliper, which is what, base
okay.
diameter height, DBH, which,
Yeah, okay.
for your average person, is 4.5 feet high, which is basically chest height. What if you were to take a tape measure and go across the tree, what is that? That's 4.5, 5 inch minimum. That's what we're proposing, 5 inch.
Yeah.
DBH,
And they're gonna be how
which is
high,
4.5
25 feet high at
Yeah,
planting?
yeah. 5 inch caliper, 5.5 inch caliper is gonna be about 25 feet tall, 25. We've gotta bring them in on 18 wheelers. It's the only way to bring them in. They're big trees.
And the stone that's going around the walkways, what is it? What are we at now? 'Cause
It's-
it's like had like several renditions. I'm confused.
Oh yeah, no, it's the large natural Goshen stone. Do you know I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the Newburyport Art Association? In the back, they made that little garden area. If you actually look at it before you go through the arch, there's huge, large, flat pieces of natural stone in the walkway. That's what it is, comes
Okay,
out of that.
I'll go double
It's
look. I've
very
seen that.
large,
so-
flat, natural, from New England native stone.
Because when we get the plans, they're not updated. They're not updated on your website at all. So we keep circling the pond, and we're not sure what we're walking on when we're circling it, so.
Yeah, that's it. It's really the best way is to, if you get a chance, go down and look at it, because it's on the ground there.
That sort of was what I was alluding to when I
Yeah.
said that you might want to make your plan sets consistent with what you're saying, because people are looking at those and going, well, this isn't what I heard, so.
And if it says flagging, there's different types of stone used for flagging. What that means is, flagging is just irregular, large natural stones. They
It says
call it
flagstone, which means slate to some people.
Yeah.
It says 3.5 inch pavers
Right.
on the detail, which confuses people. Nowhere in there does it talk about the river rock, although you and I have discussed them.
Right, yeah.
But it never made it to the plan.
Okay, so we can make that change. You didn't realize that,
Yeah,
but that's
because
what it is,
it
yeah.
causes a lot of
And
confusion.
they're thick, I mean, the pieces run between 3 and 5,
Yeah,
6
well, that was
inches
a
thick. and
suggestion
they're-
that we requested at the
pieces.
first,
They're
one
not
of the first
small.
meetings, so, and,
Yeah,
but I checked the website, and the website's not updated at all, so that didn't help me, so that's why I'm
Yeah, we're
asking.
rebuilding the website as
So.
we speak.
Yeah, and just one little tiny comment that has nothing to do with you guys. We're not the Historical Society, which is on the website, we're the Historical Commission, we're
Okay.
part of the town government, we're not the one up on
Right.
the
Oh, yeah,
Cushing
right,
House,
right,
so
yeah,
just
sorry,
don't, yeah, people confuse, it's not just you guys, people confuse it all the time.
Okay.
They're a historical society, they have tours and
So
do all
forth.
that, we're
Yeah.
part of the town government actually, so
Right.
we report to the Board of Selectmen, so it's a little, just a little It's one of
Okay.
those little pet peeve things.
Yeah, no worries, no
Tiffany, you
worries.
got that for the website?
I know.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
No, I'll just put it on the record that we're very grateful to Vern and to Camet Engineering because we've run up a big balance with these folks and they've been very kind and we've never paid him anything. He's been very kind. So it's been, it's been a nice journey.
Good.
Lots of good friends.
Good, glad to hear it. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, do we know how that area, like where the new ball field is gonna be, how that, does everything end up in the pond anyway?
Yeah, I actually
You know
brought
something,
this
Dan?
to
Yeah, I
explain.
apologize
I have it
because-
on the back.
I apologize, I had my
grading plan.
plans and they were rolled, so they weren't in the pile, and so they're down on my desk. I can run down and get them if I have to.
Yeah, I actually set it up so I could just easily go like this. Was the idea anyway.
I think I'm kind of, just sort of wondering how to improve the water, what can we doing as much as
That helps.
can be done to improve the water quality in the pond? And whether any sort of effort to kind of,
This, I think
Treat
the
the
one
water
you're asking
before
about,
we
we
get
can
to the
see, if
pond.
you understand grading, everything's being pitched this way.
It's pretty much gonna go like it does now, only in a bigger watershed, by the
Yeah.
looks of it.
Exactly, it's really still going there with its natural, because your high points are over here, when you have to go up the existing grades of the road. So we're working with this existing, and then making everything as level as possible, but it's all gonna drain, as it is now, towards the pond. But because it's such a long distance, by the time it gets to the pond, unless you had 4 days of rain, the 50-year floods, which we did have 2 years in a row or something like that, if I remember way back when, you're not gonna have any standing water, and that's really what we wanna do. And when we bring in the new soil, we wanna mix it with a sandy mix, just like they do in ball fields, because you have a very high water table. So we wanna be able to have really good drainage and a great grass, great lawn area. And so that the kids can play and that the users are not gonna be running around with soggy feet,
I suppose that
Dumping through
itself, Dan,
puddles,
is a little
which they
bit
currently do.
of a benefit to have that less channelized and more of a larger sheet.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
was the place you were talking about,
I was
mud
talking,
in that's right here,
well,
it's visible.
well, right here where it says mud, yes, that's exactly what
I mean,
caught
you
my.
can see it's a drainage ditch going
It's,
in the-
exactly, they've dug that over time, and they've dug that in there to relieve that area. Given these grades, the way they're big and sweeping now, that
So that-
shouldn't
That
pocket
gets
that
filled
way.
in?
If that gets filled in,
Yeah,
yeah.
that'll be eliminated. Someone actually went out there and you can tell, did it with a shovel, actually dug it down, because there was basically a big puddle. So somebody, I don't know who, but someone had actually dug it to help filter the water
Well,
down.
cause it's a big bowl right now, so
It's
the
a
only
big
way
bowl,
to get
so
rid of
it
the
is.
I
water
think
was
what
to
I'm,
dig a ditch.
just
Yeah,
something that pops
exactly.
in my head is you're gonna put stone down to put your pavers, or what, the river rock, is there some way to kinda use that as a stormwater, treatment type feature? And I think you were talking, is the grading, the walkway graded away from the pond or towards it?
It's towards.
You can't grade
Except for not in the street,
you can't grade it away from the pond.
it's going towards
because
the
you
road,
pocket-
along High Road.
You pocket water against the pond. What did you want, you're talking
No,
about
I'm
maybe
just sort
some
of-
type of stormwater treatment in
You know,
here?
This walkway is gonna interrupt any water that's going towards the pond.
I think it's gonna be integrated into the grade so that it.
No, it's
My-
going
Exactly,
down
it's gonna be in the
It's not
natural
interrupting
grade,
anything, because the water flows
Yeah.
down.
because it's
Dan,
all
my
on
problem
natural
with putting
stone, you gotta
anything
get
in
4 to
here
3/4
would be
inch
that with the high
stone,
water
everything's gonna
table,
filter
all
down.
it's gonna do is fill
So
the
there will
water.
be no standing
And then
water.
if you get this
That's
thing all filled
our
with
number
water
one
and it
purpose
freezes, it's just gonna blow
is to
apart on
fix
us.
those grades on top of the
Well, it
renovation.
may, it shouldn't with the base they're putting on there, but, again, I'd be concerned with trying to get anything into the ground here, cause water's gonna come up through it.
So the idea, the end product is sheet flow into the pond, except on the roadside, which is gonna be built up so it doesn't do it.
Yeah, it's all naturally, that's where it goes now, but it's gonna be, as Doug had said, it's spread through, right across, so that you're gonna have a very large area for the water to naturally filtrate through.
I think between High Road and the geese, those are probably our biggest pollution issues.
At present,
Yeah,
yeah.
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 And you know, just another, maybe it's in, because it's, you said 10 inches on the wall height increase, so 6 here.
Approximately, and it's gonna be natural stone, and the reason is that around New England, if you look across, if you're at the old town hall, or the police station, or Newbury, bank, and you look across, there's all natural stone walls on the opposite side of the upper green. So we want that to blend in, even though it's not gonna be very high, it's really to be able to fix the grade. And to have that, from an aesthetic point of view, blend in with what's happening behind it.
Yeah, but you're also gonna take the water from High Road and direct it to the catch basin and not allow that
Exactly.
water to go into the pond.
Absolutely.
So the High Road water, the dirty water that's coming off the road is not going
It's a
into
great
the pond.
improvement.
That's why we have to, we don't have a choice, because I don't want anything going into the pond. I mean, it's just,
There's
makes no sense.
asphalt and
It's the way it's
whatever
been.
going.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions or comments? Initially, it was my desire to keep this open until other processes and permits were in place, because we have the authority to do so, but I'm second thinking that, and second guessing on that, and thinking that other processes can take their time and do their thing, and the board's got a couple of choices. We can continue it contingent, or hearing, or waiting for, I should say, the revised information from both Vern and Camet, or we can move forward and close the public hearing tonight, and have it contingent upon getting the information that we've asked for. So that would be the adjustments that we've talked about to the plan, and certainly before we close this hearing, or before I write the conditions, I'd like to look at the SWIP report.
Can I do a motion?
You certainly may, if the board is ready to close the public hearing, absolutely.
I'd like the motion to close the public hearing.
Contingent, right?
Yeah, was that the condition?
Do I have a second? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to closing the public hearing? All right, so we're gonna issue an order of conditions, consistent with the plan. Any special orders that you wanna see?
The two that you mentioned,
So we want the SWIP report,
the SWIP report.
and we want the details
The details.
consistent with the narrative.
Right.
Okay. Anything? Go ahead.
Well, just thank you very, very
Yeah,
much.
thank
We're
you.
very excited about it.
Yeah, very excited.
Thank you.
It's gonna be a big asset for the
I
town.
would suggest that, just as Doug says, to update the plans to everything. I know you've had so
It's
much
consistent.
input from everybody,
Yeah,
but before you go before the planning board, you wanna get updated to where you are
nail it
now.
down, yeah.
Yeah, especially, yeah, because flagging can be anything, so we'll specify all that.
Okay.
All right.
And make sure you get your sequencing in there, because that's important to me too, Vern. That was well thought out to do that, so.
Okay, yeah, we'll make note of that, and
Okay.
put it on, yeah. Terrific.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays.
Yeah, same to you. Those concerned with Plazo, 14th Street, sorry. Yeah, like I don't hear that often enough.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
Thank you for thinking, see, we doubled up. You never know. It's like this, you know.
Yeah. All right.
We have a request for a certificate of compliance from Michael O'Hara at 29 Southern Boulevard, DEP number 50-1152. I did a site visit on 12/12/2018. He is compliant, and it would be my recommendation that we grant a certificate of compliance. Before that motion is made, though, I had gone down the month before And the reason for 2 site visits down there, I don't know if you remember, but we pulled this off the agenda last month, is he had solid sides underneath his 2 feet. So I made him remove those. I went back, they removed, and so again, I find it to be in substantial compliance, and it would be my recommendation to grant the certificate.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Oh, you guys are sharing a pen? I got an extra one here.
Oh, that's all right. I don't mind sharing.
Okay, that's good. And the only other thing that we have is, if you remember at the last meeting, Karen Cumberland, 35 Northern Boulevard, we determined that it was better to go after the mitigation with an enforcement order. So the enforcement order was issued, I signed it, but the board must ratify it also at the next regularly scheduled meeting. So it would be my recommendation to the board that we sign the enforcement order so that we can send it off to Karen Cumberland.
Move to ratify the enforcement order.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Rachel, you won't sign this.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
No idea.
You don't have nothing about it. Yeah.
It's this one.
It is that one, yes.
Even though I read the minutes.
Whoops, I'm there already. Yep.
There's several meetings of discussions.
Well, it was a,
This was a learning experience.
Yeah, we just came on when
that was a
this one
learning
started.
experience for everyone.
Always fun.
I was gonna mention, I did have I sent some
We have enough
ideas to Brian
signatures.
about those signs and,
But
I think we were gonna talk about it.
No, the regional.
Yep, Brian's not here. We were gonna talk about that tonight. I'll pull him out
Just a-
quickly.
Doug, real quick, about that last one, do we still have a quorum if it's just the 3 of us signing without Rachel signing it?
Well,
I'm just-
we have a quorum, and we are oh, that's a good question. No, you know something, you're gonna have to call up Ben, because Ben was here and have him sign it. Because we can take action as a commission, if 4 of us show up, we can open the meeting. At that point, you need a majority of the board, you need 3 people to vote on a project. But a majority of the board has to sign that, and 3 is not a majority on here, but we've got 4, right? We've got 4 signatures.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we're good, we're good
Okay.
with the 4 signatures, yes. Brian had come up with a picture that was quite busy. It showed a forest or a tree background. And when we talk to people about having that printed up, that is the most difficult, most costly type of sign to go after. So he had one that he had sent around, but Jen put these up, which are some alternatives. They're easy to see, they're clean. But it's all open for discussion, and nothing is cut in stone, and
I sent him, I think that's good. I mean, the thing he came up with had no, it was like, what's the sign for?
Yeah.
There was no real rationale
Yeah.
displayed on the sign as to why there was a sign there, so. I sent him a picture of what Rowley uses. I tried to get more from Ipswich, but nobody got back to me.
Okay.
But they typically say, don't mess around being in the sun.
okay, that's the message.
You
Yeah.
gotta say something, and that's a little bit more generic and it's more multi-purpose perhaps. But anyways,
Yeah,
we got another meeting on that.
yeah, you can take these and
I'll
mark them
send-
up, or mark up your
I'll
own.
send
or-
you guys what I discovered.
Would we only use these for wetland?
Well, that was Brian's thing, he was, might be. you know,
Usually it's
conservation.
BVW, because what happens with BVW is, I see it all the time over time, people take their leaves down the edge, they throw the leaves down there, it's usually that kind of stuff. And then they ran into big trouble at Warren Mantis subdivision, Fowland Farms, because there were wetlands all around the site. Well, the guy takes his lawnmower and he runs another 4-foot swath, you know, and he runs that for a couple of years, and then he takes an 8-foot swath, and before you know it, he's cutting the wetlands, and he's getting an administrative consent order from DEP. So it does, the spread and the sprawl does take place, especially in our town, you know, where everybody at some point backs up to a wetland,
Yeah.
almost, you know.
So the wetland's the key to it, really.
Yes, yeah, and could you use them for other resource areas? Of course you could. Yeah, of course you could. You know, down the Barrier Beach, you go over the bridge, the whole thing's Barrier Beach, so the resource area is somewhat differently. Your salt marsh, that's usually a pretty definitive line. But most people don't realize where the wetland is. They think they have to have their feet wet. They think they really have to be standing in the water before they're in the wetland, and that's not the case at all, so.
You know, I think the case that we were looking at, that application last month, you know, it's like a no disturb. You know, we don't have that in the bylaw, but that's kind of what we're talking about. Most of the other towns that have signs, they're basically bylaw signs, you know, this is no disturb. That's the wording on them. Notice 25-foot no disturb.
No disturb.
Would it be resource area beyond this point? Would we?
You could change that to resource instead of wetland, because then that would apply
Maybe,
to
you know.
any.
It seems like we spend a lot of time talking about Plum Island. And is Plum Island wetland?
Yes.
It is.
Well,
Very
no,
brief.
well, Plum Island is a resource area, and Plum Island is made up of Barrier Beach, coastal dunes, and coastal beach. And so the dune standards are the same from one side to the other. Salt marsh is a little different. You do have a little bit of BVW down on the island, believe it or not. Down around Yale, Dartmouth, that loop right there, out behind there, is a rather extensive wetland. There's one down, a small one, two of them on 12th Street, on either side of 12th Street, down the end, actually Sandy Lane.
Or would we use those signs if someone backed up to salt marsh area? And, you know, to say, this is what we agreed to, let's put some signs here so you don't keep mowing.
You could, if the circumstances were right. There's only a few instances I can think of in town. There's some out off of Hay Street where the knoll backs up to the railroad tracks, where people have kind of taken their lawns right down to the salt marsh. Usually there's a small transition zone. Some places in Newbury we're like this, so there's no transition zone. It's salt marsh, like down a riverfront.
Right.
It's salt marsh right to the coastal bank usually. In some instances, yeah, you have that, at my house, you have a gradual change from your BVW into your salt marsh.
That's Raleigh. But again, they got a bylaw.
No cut.
You know, basically, they've got a 25-foot no disturb, and that's, you know, a bylaw thing. I think,
I have an idea for a sign. I still think this is probably too busy. Something more along the lines of that makes a lot more sense to me. I'll mock something up and I'll actually pass it through my wife, who is a graphic designer as well, and
Awesome.
take notes from her, because she's obviously very visual, and I'll send it out to everybody.
Doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, because a couple things, like, it has to be only one color, because that would be huge savings in printing it, and also the type of materials you can use, much more durable, rather than something that's printed, it'll fade over time. So
it's gotta be
anyway,
built. You know,
I'll send something out.
probably
I think it'd be,
aluminum.
Do they have aluminum or plastic, Dan, these guys?
That's not very big. It was on a 4x4, so,
Okay.
you know, it's probably
Yeah.
4-inch round. A 4-inch square's got a little more area, and those are available. I do a lot of trail stuff, so the trail signs,
yeah,
there's a couple different sources.
because I don't think it needs to say everything on the sign. People say, that's a marker for something, let me figure out what it is. You know, obviously say do not disturb or whatever, but keeping it simple, I think, makes a lot more sense. And then the sign can be smaller.
I mean,
Because the last thing we want is, you know, a sign on somebody's, on a post, and like.
You got a 4x4 and you got a sign that's
Yeah.
12 inches wide. Yeah.
Right, like,
Just
well,
the
the house
windows
you're
and
talking about,
the-
if they have 5 of those signs, it's gonna look terrible, nobody's gonna want that in their yard, and, you know, I wouldn't want it in my yard.
I think in our, in
But if
our
it was,
case,
if it's something like that, that's, you know,
Small
you see right
display.
past it, but unless you're doing something, you know, landscaping or whatever, you're like, oh,
I
that's
think
right.
in our case, the thing that's important is it's a jurisdictional area behind. We have an order of conditions typically that's requiring these signs, so it's for the order, but
That's a
it's
good,
Yeah,
yeah.
jurisdictional area, do not disturb, do not impact. And that's probably the
That's good language.
closest
Yeah,
message.
Yeah, that sounds scarier.
Yeah,
Jurisdictional.
Ooh.
Might get their attention.
But when you write an order, we could, that could be a condition that you need to put on this sign every 25 feet along this line, right?
Yep,
And.
that's what'll happen. in
That
these
was
sort of-
what would
yes.
happen, and if the sign was, like you said, maybe only 3.5, 4 inches wide, the same as the post,
right.
you know, it wouldn't be this big thing that glows at night, you know?
Ipswich requires granite, 8-inch granite posts
Oh my goodness.
every 100 feet, you know, on a big deal kind of thing. So,
Even for single-family homes?
I've been down Ipswich a few times, and there's always talk of granite markers,
Wow.
Wow.
you know, and then, you know, some of them wanna do boulders with some kind of plaque on them or something. And they even, you know, they have to think about that real hard. But I think this is, you know, this kind of thing will be helpful in certain areas where we, like in that particular application, we were just worried about creek.
He was tight, and he was tight already, so yeah, I agree.
Is this the first time that you've considered putting up signs?
Yes, yes.
Or I should say, we've considered.
It was actually,
There you go.
it would've been nice to, it may have helped, something like this may have helped with Karen Cumberland, you know, or may help on Plum Island where you've had the sort of the creek going on. You know, you got a paved parking lot that you have some sort of
Maybe,
problem with, you
yeah.
know, put some 6x6s there to mark out the edge, and here's some signs.
I can't see him at everybody's driveway, though.
No.
Yeah.
but
You
maybe
know, once you do it with one
that's
person,
been a
you'd
problem.
almost have to do it every time, you know,
Yeah, that
you
would.
set a precedent.
I think
That's, I think you're right there.
Yeah,
When
it
you
might
do
be-
conditions,
might be
though.
busy.
That'd
You
be a
can
lot
write
of
it up.
fun.
It's part of the conditions. We grant what you wanna do, but like with that duplex, you know, but you need to
Oh,
mark that.
Yeah, with the duplex, I think it's warranted, I think.
You know,
it's-
and it's like the contractor or whatever can put it in before he
Yeah.
sells the house and, you know,
Yeah.
does his thing and just, in the existing conditions, we can't go around and say, you need to put these signs up. But when they come to us,
Exactly, exactly.
we give them permission to do something, or we agree that what they wanna do is okay, but you need to put these signs up so the next guy, you know, will know what the conditions
Now,
are.
tell me something, legally, can you pull them after the order of conditions runs and you've got a certificate of compliance, or that they need to be placed in the order of conditions in perpetuity?
I don't, you know,
So we put them in with condition number 1, say, and then condition number 1 is carried in, I have a generic line in there that condition X runs in perpetuity, even with the certificate of compliance.
Do our conditions go with the deed?
They go with the deed, but with a certificate of compliance, they completely go away. So the conditions comes off the lien.
They don't, well, they go away legally, but if you have your title done, because I used to do title work for the government all the time, we would not be able to get rid of those conditions. Those conditions showed up in the title no matter what.
As a federal entity, you mean?
Well, it was a requirement of the feds, but the title company would not accept, if you were getting a title policy, and you get a bunch of exceptions that you go try to take off. One of the exceptions on that title policy would be an order of conditions, and the title company would not take those off, even if you had received a certificate of compliance for the property.
Okay. But I'm
So, but
wondering,
it's not, I mean, it's just a interesting
yeah,
point, it has nothing to do with the legal.
well, I'm wondering if the Salem
ramifications there.
Registry of Deeds would do the same, though. If someone takes a a certificate of compliance down there, and there's nothing on there that is to run in perpetuity, would they even read it and know that, oh yeah, there's some posts on this one, and the post mark the wetlands, and they're in perpetuity? They wouldn't. So after someone received their certificate, they could go out there, pull their post, I'm never going back out, the town's never going back out, the next guy in has no idea, and it doesn't get moved forward. So it really should be a condition that stays with the deed, if that's what we're gonna do, and if we're gonna be serious about it.
Yeah, because if not, we give them permission to pull the post,
Well, exactly,
right?
yeah.
I mean, we can't say you weren't supposed to, and they go, sure I was, you know.
Well, in this too, and you have a deed reference, now you go to sell the house, the posts are pulled, the next guy comes in, he reads the deed reference, and he goes, oh, there's a
My
potential
whole-
condition on here, what are the posts, where am I
My
supposed
whole,
to be
my
seeing
whole
these?
backyard's wetlands, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
You know,
Exactly.
I can't do this, or I can't do what I wanna do in the future because of that.
maybe I'll talk to town council about it, but my guess is that we should leave it on the order in perpetuity.
Makes sense if there's a way to do it.
Yeah. Well, there is, I checked that box, and then when they go back down, they're forced to leave it on.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, all right. Again, I'll check with town council and see if we can move forward. That's it for me. I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.